I asked my son to pick me up after I'd had a risky surgery, but he refused. I just. My name is Beverly, and at 67 years old, I never thought I'd be sharing this story with you. After 40 years as a dedicated cardiac nurse in Portland, I recently underwent a risky heart valve replacement surgery. My son Thomas and I used to be incredibly close until he married Stephanie 5 years ago. Our relationship has grown increasingly distant, but I never imagined he would abandon me at my most vulnerable moment. The text exchange we had after my surgery still shocks me to this day. Before I tell you how I handled this heartbreaking situation, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when family let you down. I spent 40 years of my life as a cardiac nurse dedicated to helping others through their most vulnerable moments. The irony that I would face my own cardiac crisis without family support isn't lost on me. I raised Thomas by myself after his father, my beloved husband James, died unexpectedly from a heart attack when Thomas was just 10 years old. The loss devastated us both, but it also brought us closer together. We became a team supporting each other through the grief and challenges of our new reality. As a single mother, I made countless sacrifices to ensure Thomas had every opportunity in life. I worked double shifts, took extra certification courses to increase my salary, and even sold my wedding jewelry to help pay for his law school application fees. Thomas was always a brilliant child with an analytical mind that seemed perfect for legal work. He graduated top of his class and secured a position at Wilson Bryant and Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. I couldn't have been prouder. We maintained our close relationship well into his adulthood. Every Sunday, Thomas would visit for dinner and we'd catch up on our week. He'd share stories about his cases, carefully omitting confidential details, of course, and I'd tell him about my patients again, respecting privacy boundaries. These weekly dinners were the highlight of my life after retirement. Thomas would bring groceries, help with small repairs around my house, and occasionally surprise me with tickets to the theater or symphony, knowing how much I loved live performances. Everything changed when Thomas met Stephanie at a charity fundraiser 5 years ago. She was striking with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes, working as a marketing executive for a luxury brand. When Thomas first introduced us, Stephanie seemed friendly enough, complimenting my home and asking questions about my nursing career. But there was something beneath the surface that made me uneasy. Her smile never quite reached her eyes, and she had a subtle way of redirecting conversations to center around her preferences. Within 6 months of dating Stephanie, our weekly dinners became bi-weekly, then monthly. After they married, I was lucky to see Thomas once every 3 months. His excuses always involved Stephanie in some way. They were renovating their new house according to Stephanie's vision. Stephanie's parents needed help with their vacation property. Stephanie had planned a surprise weekend getaway. Stephanie was exhausted from work and needed Thomas home for support. I tried to maintain our relationship while respecting their boundaries as a newly married couple. I invited them both to dinner, suggested meeting at restaurants instead of my home, and even offered to join them for activities Stephanie enjoyed. But the invitations were rarely accepted, and when they were, Stephanie dominated the conversation frequently, checking her watch or phone as if counting down the minutes until they could leave. The holidays became particularly painful. For Thomas's entire life, we had celebrated Thanksgiving and Christmas together. After his marriage, these traditions were quickly replaced with elaborate celebrations at Stephanie's family's country home. Thomas invited me to join once, but I felt so unwelcome and isolated that I politely declined future invitations. The last 2 Christmases, Thomas stopped by for exactly 45 minutes to exchange gifts before rushing off to Stephanie's family events. Despite the growing distance, I never imagined Thomas would completely abandon me when I truly needed him. But as my health began to decline, the true nature of our relationship became painfully clear. The diagnosis came after months of increasing fatigue and shortness of breath. Initially, I blamed it on age and perhaps a bit of depression from the loneliness that had settled into my life, but when I nearly fainted while watering my garden, my neighbor Linda insisted on driving me to the hospital. The tests revealed severe mitral valve regurgitation, likely a genetic condition exacerbated by age. The cardiologist, Dr. Winters, explained that I would need a valve replacement surgery. Given my age and the complexity of the procedure, there were significant risks involved. Beverly, as a former cardiac nurse, you understand these procedures better than most patients. Dr. Winters said, his expression serious but kind. You know the risks for someone your age, but you also know what happens if we don't proceed. The valve is deteriorating rapidly. I nodded, trying to process the information both as a medical professional and as a terrified patient. How soon? I asked. Within the next 2 weeks would be ideal. We don't want to wait until your condition deteriorates further. That evening, I called Thomas. My hands trembled as I dialed, not from my heart condition, but from the anxiety of not knowing whether he would actually care. To my surprise, he answered on the second ring. Mom, is everything okay? You rarely call during work hours. I explained the diagnosis and the recommended surgery. Thomas's initial reaction seemed genuinely concerned. A valve replacement. That's serious, Mom. Why didn't you tell me you weren't feeling well? Before I could answer, I heard Stephanie's voice in the background asking who was calling. Thomas briefly explained the situation to her. Suddenly, Stephanie was on the line. Beverly, have you looked into alternative treatments? My yoga instructor's mother tried some amazing supplements for her heart, and she says she feels 20 years younger. I patiently explained the severity of my condition, drawing on my medical background. This isn't something that can be addressed with supplements or lifestyle changes alone. The valve needs to be replaced. Thomas took the phone back, promising he would help with transportation to and from the hospital and assist with my recovery. Just let me know the surgery date once it's scheduled and I'll make arrangements at work, he assured me. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, though I couldn't help noticing Stephanie's silence in the background. Perhaps I had misjudged her and, by extension, misjudged how much Thomas still cared. 2 days later, I received a call from Dr. Winters' office. They had a cancellation and could schedule my surgery for the following Monday, just 5 days away. I immediately texted Thomas with the details, adding that I would need to be at the hospital by 6 a.m. for pre-op procedures. 3 hours later, Thomas called. Mom, I'm really sorry, but I won't be able to drive you to the hospital on Monday. I have an important meeting with a potential client that I absolutely cannot reschedule. Could you ask one of your friends or take a taxi? The disappointment stung, but I kept my voice steady. I understand, Thomas. Work is important. What about after the surgery? The doctor says I'll need someone to help me home and stay with me for at least the first night. Of course I'll be there. The meeting should be over by afternoon so I can pick you up when you're discharged. I arranged for Linda to drive me to the hospital, grateful for her friendship, despite her own arthritis making driving uncomfortable. The day before my surgery, I hoped Thomas might visit or at least call to wish me well. Instead, I received a brief text, "Good luck tomorrow, Mom. You'll do great." I tried to focus on the positive. At least he remembered. At least he would be there for the recovery, which was when I would need help the most. The surgery itself is mostly a blur of pre-anesthesia anxiety and post-operative pain. I vaguely remember the nurse in recovery checking my vitals and asking if any family would be visiting. When I mumbled my son's name, she nodded sympathetically and said no one had called to check on me yet, but that wasn't unusual during longer procedures. The emotional pain of waking up alone cut deeper than the physical discomfort of the surgery. As a nurse, I had always ensured patients had someone waiting for them after procedures. I had held countless hands, offered reassurance, and called family members on behalf of patients. Now, in my own time of need, the chair beside my bed remained empty. After 2 days in intensive care and another 3 in a standard room, Dr. Winters determined I was ready for discharge. However, he emphasized that I shouldn't walk unassisted for at least 72 hours and would need help with basic tasks during early recovery. The new valve is working well, but your body has been through significant trauma, he explained during his morning rounds. Any unnecessary strain could compromise your recovery. Do you have someone to help you at home? Yes, I answered confidently. My son Thomas will be picking me up today. The discharge nurse Megan explained that hospital policy required all cardiac surgery patients to have an escort during discharge. We'll need your son to come to the nurse's station to sign some paperwork before we can release you, she said, while helping me pack my few belongings. At 11 that morning, freshly showered and dressed in comfortable clothes Linda had brought me, I sat on the edge of my bed and texted Thomas. Just got discharged from the hospital. Doctor said I can't walk yet. Can you pick me up when you have time? I stared at the phone, watching for those three little dots that would indicate he was responding. Nothing appeared. 15 minutes passed, then 30. I told myself he was probably in a meeting or driving and couldn't text back immediately. After 45 minutes, my phone finally buzzed. My relief quickly turned to shock as I read his response. "My wife said we can't keep dropping everything for you every time. Just call an Uber." I stared at the message, reading it over and over, convinced I must be misinterpreting it somehow. My hands shook so badly I could barely type my reply. "Thomas, the doctor says I need someone to help me walk. The hospital requires an escort for discharge after cardiac surgery. It's their policy. I can't take an Uber alone." Another 20 minutes passed before his next reply. "Mom, you're exaggerating. You were a nurse. You know these policies are just suggestions. I'm sure you can walk fine. We're really busy today." Tears streamed down my face as I tried once more. "Thomas, please. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't necessary. The surgeon was very clear about the restrictions." The next message came quickly, but wasn't from Thomas, though it came from his phone. "Beverly, this is Stephanie. We have a very important dinner with my boss tonight, and I need Thomas to help prepare. You managed fine on your own for years before we were married. I'm sure you can manage now. Please stop trying to make Thomas feel guilty." I couldn't stop the tears now. A nurse, walking by, noticed my distress and came into the room. "Mrs. Johnson, what's wrong? Are you in pain?" I shook my head, embarrassed to explain the situation. How do you tell a complete stranger that your only child, the person you devoted your life to raising, has just refused to help you after major surgery? "My son," I finally managed to say, "he can't come pick me up." The nurse, whose name tag read Sophia, sat beside me on the bed. "Is there anyone else we can call for you?" I thought about Linda, but her arthritis made it impossible for her to provide the physical support I would need. My other friends were either working or dealing with their own health issues. The harsh reality hit me at 67 years old, despite a lifetime of helping others. I had no one I could count on in my moment of need. As Sophia gently patted my hand, my initial hurt began to transform into something else. A slow-burning anger sparked inside me, not just at Thomas, but at myself for becoming so dependent on the idea that family would always be there. I had spent 4 decades caring for strangers, yet somehow failed to build a support system beyond my son. I sent one final text to Thomas. "I never thought the day would come when you would refuse to help your mother after heart surgery. I raised you better than this. I'll find another way." He didn't respond. Sophia returned shortly with another woman who introduced herself as Jennifer, a hospital social worker. "Mrs. Johnson, Sophia mentioned you're having some difficulties with discharge arrangements," Jennifer said, taking a seat in the visitor's chair. "I'd like to help if I can." Initially, I was reluctant to share the details of my situation. Pride is a powerful thing, especially for someone who has always been the caregiver rather than the recipient of care. But Jennifer's kind, non-judgmental approach gradually broke down my resistance. "Unfortunately, this happens more often than you might think," Jennifer said after I explained about Thomas's refusal. "The good news is that we have resources available through our patient advocacy services. We can arrange temporary care services for patients who need assistance during initial recovery." "I can't afford a private nurse," I admitted, thinking about my modest retirement savings. Jennifer smiled reassuringly. "Most of these services are covered by insurance for the first 48 to 72 hours after cardiac surgery. Let me make a few calls and see what we can arrange." Within an hour, Jennifer returned with good news. The hospital's patient advocacy program could provide a caregiver to help me get home and assist with basic needs for the first 3 days of recovery. The service would be covered entirely by my insurance. "We have someone available who can start today," Jennifer explained. "Her name is Angela, and she specializes in post-surgical cardiac care. Would you like to meet her?" Angela arrived shortly after, a warm woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a confident demeanor. She reviewed my discharge instructions carefully and asked thoughtful questions about my home setup. "I'm sorry you're in this situation, Beverly," she said, "but I want you to know you're in good hands. I'll help you get settled at home and make sure you have everything you need for a smooth recovery." Despite Angela's kindness, I felt a lingering sense of shame. I hate being a burden, I confessed. I never thought I'd be in this position. Angela gave me an understanding look. You know, my mother-in-law went through something similar with my husband's brother. He kept making promises to help after her knee replacement, but never showed up. I ended up being her caregiver, and it was the start of an unexpected friendship. Sometimes family disappoints us, but that creates space for new connections. Something about Angela's story made me feel less alone. As she helped me into the wheelchair and gathered my belongings, I felt a small sense of relief begin to replace the hurt and anger. The ride home with Angela was surprisingly comfortable. She drove my car, which Linda had brought to the hospital, while sharing stories about her grandchildren and asking me questions about my nursing career. By the time we reached my house, I discovered that Angela lived only a few blocks away in the same neighborhood. What a coincidence, I remarked as she helped me carefully navigate the 3 steps to my front door. I don't believe in coincidences, Angela replied with a wink. Just good timing. Over the next few hours, Angela transformed my living room into a functional recovery space. She moved a comfortable recliner to face the television-arranged medications on the side table with a clear schedule, set up a mini fridge with water and healthy snacks within reach, and placed my phone and emergency call button where I could easily access them. As she worked, we talked about family dynamics and the complicated emotions that come with aging and changing relationships. The hardest part of getting older isn't the physical changes, I confided. It's realizing that the people you thought would always be there might not be. Angela nodded thoughtfully as she fluffed a pillow. My grandmother used to say that family is who shows up, not who shares your blood. I found that to be true, more often than not. Before leaving that evening, Angela helped me into comfortable pajamas and made sure I had everything I needed within reach. I'm officially off duty now, she said, but I live just a few blocks away on Maple Street. My personal number is on the contact list I created for you. Don't hesitate to call, even if it's the middle of the night. Isn't that beyond what the service requires? I asked, touched by her generosity. Probably, she admitted with a smile. But I've learned there's a big difference between being a burden and being part of a community. We all need help sometimes, Beverly. Accepting it isn't weakness, it's just being human. As Angela set up my phone on its charger, I noticed she had moved the framed photo of Thomas from its prominent position on the side table to a shelf across the room. She hadn't mentioned it, but the subtle rearrangement spoke volumes. Out of sight, but not completely gone, just like Thomas himself. 3 days passed without any contact from Thomas. No calls, no texts, not even an email to check if I was alive or dead. Each day of silence was another small wound to my heart, but ironically, my physical recovery was progressing well under Angela's attentive care. Beyond the professional help, my community stepped up in ways I never expected. Linda organized a meal train and different neighbors brought dinner each night. Margaret from across the street collected my mail. Walter, 2 doors down, walked over to take out my trash bins. Small kindnesses accumulated, creating a safety net I hadn't known existed. On the 4th day after my discharge, my phone rang with Thomas's distinctive ringtone. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello, Thomas," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Hey, Mom, how are you feeling?" he asked casually, as if the events of the past week hadn't occurred, as if he hadn't abandoned his mother after heart surgery. I paused carefully, considering my response. Physically, I'm recovering well. Emotionally, I'm dealing with the disappointment of my only child refusing to help me after major surgery. "Mom," Thomas sighed, the defensiveness immediately evident in his tone. "I was really swamped with work, and Stephanie had that dinner with her boss. You know how important her career is to her." In the background, I could hear Stephanie saying something, though her words weren't clear. Her tone, however, was unmistakable. "Thomas," I said calmly, "I understand that you and Stephanie have busy lives. What I don't understand is how you could leave your mother without help after heart surgery. I would never have done that to you." "That's not fair," Thomas protested. "We offered to pay for an Uber." "The doctor specifically said I needed physical assistance. The hospital required an escort. These weren't suggestions, Thomas. They were medical necessities." "You're being dramatic," he replied, his voice hardening. "You always manage to make me feel guilty whenever your expectations aren't met." I took another deep breath, feeling a strength I hadn't experienced in years. "I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. I'm establishing boundaries. I devoted my life to caring for you, and while I don't expect the same level of sacrifice in return, I do expect basic human decency and respect." There was a pause, and I could almost feel Thomas's shock at my newfound assertiveness. Throughout his adult life, I had been the accommodating mother, never wanting to be a burden, always understanding when plans were canceled or promises broken. Suddenly, there was a shuffling sound, and Stephanie's voice came clearly through the phone. "Beverly, this manipulative behavior needs to stop. Thomas works incredibly hard to provide a good life for us, and your dramatic demands are creating unnecessary stress. You are a nurse. You should be more self-sufficient than most people." Rather than engaging with her accusations, I simply said, "Stephanie, this conversation is between Thomas and me. If he wants to discuss our relationship, he can call me back himself." Then I did something I had never done before. I ended the call. My phone immediately buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Sorry about that. Stephanie is just protective. I really was busy, but I should have tried harder to help. Can we move past this?" I didn't respond immediately. For the first time, I was allowing myself to feel the full weight of my disappointment without rushing to forgive for the sake of keeping peace. 2 days later, Thomas called again. This time, his tone was very different. "Mom, I just got a notice from your insurance company. Why is there a charge for a patient advocate and home care services? That's over $2,000. "Those services were necessary because my son refused to help me after surgery," I replied calmly. "The hospital arranged them when I had no one to assist me with discharge and initial recovery." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice smaller than before. "I didn't realize. I thought you were just being dramatic, manipulative, a burden," I supplied. "No, Thomas. I was being a patient following medical advice, something you would have known if you had bothered to speak with my doctor or even read the discharge instructions." Another long pause. "Mom, I'm sorry. I know you are Thomas, but I'm learning that sorry isn't always enough. Sometimes we need to recognize patterns and make real changes." After we hung up, I sat in my recliner looking at the photo of Thomas on the distant shelf. The son I raised and the man he had become seemed like two different people, yet, despite everything, I still loved him. But loving him no longer meant accepting scraps of his attention or making excuses for his behavior. A month into my recovery, I was gradually regaining my strength and independence. Angela's official duties had ended after those first 3 days, but our friendship had just begun. She invited me to join her at the local senior community center, a place I had always avoided out of some misguided fear that attending would officially make me old. The center was nothing like I had imagined. Instead of depressing card games and complaints about arthritis, I found vibrant discussions about books, world events, and travel. I met Harriet, a retired school principal with a wicked sense of humor, Donald, a former chef who taught cooking classes, and Elaine, a widow who had reinvented herself as a watercolor artist after her husband's death. Every Thursday, we started a card game group that rotated between our homes. When my turn came to host, I discovered how much I enjoyed having a house full of laughter and conversation again. The emptiness that had expanded in Thomas's absence was gradually filling with new connections and experiences. Thomas made occasional attempts to contact me, usually with brief texts, checking on my health. I responded politely, but didn't initiate conversations or make demands on his time. Our relationship had shifted, and I was no longer organizing my emotional life around his availability. As Thanksgiving approached, Thomas called to ask about plans. For decades, I had hosted the holiday at my home, cooking Thomas's favorite dishes and accommodating whatever schedule worked for him. "Actually," I told him, "I'm hosting dinner for some friends this year. You're welcome to join us if you'd like." "Friends?" he asked, clearly surprised. "What friends? And what about Stephanie?" "Yes, friends," I confirmed. "And this invitation is just for you, Thomas." Given Stephanie's comments during our last conversation, I think it would be uncomfortable for everyone if she attended. "So you're choosing your new friends over your family?" The hurt in his voice was evident. "No, Thomas. I'm choosing to spend the holiday with people who have shown me kindness and support, people who showed up when I needed them. That's what family does, whether related by blood or not." "I said I was sorry about the hospital thing," he protested, "and I accepted your apology. But trust once broken takes time to rebuild. You're still my son and I still love you. That hasn't changed. What has changed is my willingness to be an afterthought in your life." Thomas declined the invitation, but his tone suggested he was reflecting on our conversation rather than simply reacting with anger. Thanksgiving with my new friends was nothing like previous holidays. Instead of stressing over perfectly timed dishes and Thomas's increasingly brief visits, I enjoyed a potluck feast where everyone contributed. Angela brought her famous pecan pie, Harriet made stuffing from her grandmother's recipe, and Donald took charge of the turkey with professional expertise. We shared stories, played games, and talked about plans for a group trip to the coast in the spring. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the hollow ache that had become so familiar during holidays. I was part of something again, not just waiting on the sidelines of someone else's life. My physical recovery continued to improve, and with it came a psychological strength I hadn't anticipated. I started volunteering at the hospital 2 mornings a week, sitting with patients who had no visitors, especially those recovering from cardiac procedures. I understood their fears and loneliness in a way I never could have before my own experience. This new purpose gave meaning to what had been a painful chapter in my life. When patients asked how I became a volunteer, I shared my story honestly. Many confided similar experiences with family members, and together, we found solidarity in our shared disappointment and resilience. One December afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Paul, one of Thomas's colleagues at the law firm. He explained that he was organizing the firm's holiday party and wanted to invite me as Thomas's family. "That's very kind," I said, "but I think you should check with Thomas first." "Actually," Paul hesitated, "that's partly why I'm calling. Thomas mentioned your surgery and that you've been distant since then. But what he didn't say, and what everyone at the firm has noticed, is how Stephanie has been isolating him from people. She's alienated most of his friends here, constantly monitoring his phone and schedule. We're concerned." The revelation gave me a new perspective on Thomas's behavior. While it didn't excuse his actions, it helped me understand the dynamics at play. Controlling relationships rarely begin with obvious red flags. They develop gradually, isolating the person from their support network until dependency replaces love. Instead of anger, I felt a deep sadness for my son. He was in his own kind of prison, one with invisible bars but real constraints. The question was whether he would recognize it and find his way out. 6 months after my surgery, my physical recovery was complete. Dr. Winters declared my new valve was functioning perfectly, and I had more energy than I'd had in years. Beyond the physical healing, I had experienced a profound emotional transformation. My calendar was filled with activities, my home regularly welcomed friends, and I had even started taking a watercolor class with Elaine. One snowy afternoon a week before Christmas, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, Thomas was standing on the porch, alone, holding a small gift bag and looking more vulnerable than I had seen him since childhood. "Can I come in, Mom?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside to let him enter, noticing immediately how tired he looked. There were new lines around his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that spoke of chronic stress. We sat in the living room, the space now rearranged to accommodate the small gatherings I frequently hosted. Thomas looked around, taking in the changes. "Your house feels different," he observed. "A lot of things are different." I agreed. Thomas fidgeted with the gift bag before setting it on the coffee table. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Thanksgiving, about what you said about family being the people who show up." I waited, giving him space to continue. "Stephanie and I are having problems," he finally admitted. "Actually, we've been having problems for a long time, but I didn't want to see it. After what happened with your surgery, some things became clearer." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I genuinely meant it. Despite everything, I never wanted my son to suffer. "The thing is," Thomas continued, his voice breaking slightly, "I let her control so much. I let her dictate my relationship with you because it was easier than standing up to her. And then when you really needed me, I failed you completely." Tears filled his eyes, and I reached across to take his hand. "Yes, you did fail me, Thomas. That hurt more than the surgery." "I know," he whispered. "And I don't know if you can ever forgive me for that." "I already have forgiven you," I told him. "Forgiveness isn't the issue. Trust and respect are. Those take time to rebuild." Thomas nodded, wiping his eyes. I'd like to try if you'll let me. Not just to fix things, but to be the son you deserve. Over the next hour, Thomas opened up about his marriage in ways he never had before. How Stephanie gradually isolated him from friends, monitored his phone, criticized his family, and made him feel constantly inadequate. Classic patterns of emotional control that I had seen many times in patients but had missed in my own son's life. I shared my journey too, how the abandonment led to unexpected growth, new friendships, and a community that supported me in ways I never imagined possible. You seem happier, Thomas observed. More alive somehow. I am, I acknowledged. Not because you weren't there, but because I had to find my own way forward. I discovered I'm more than just your mother. I'm Beverly, a person with value beyond my role in your life. Before Thomas left, we agreed to start fresh with clear boundaries and expectations. He would come for dinner the following week and meet some of my new friends. I would listen when he needed to talk about his marriage without judgment. Small steps toward rebuilding what was broken. 2 weeks later, Thomas joined our Thursday card game. He was quiet at first, but Angela's warmth and Donald's jokes gradually drew him out. By the end of the evening, he was laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. As he helped clean up, he whispered, "Thank you for including me, Mom. I see why you love these people." There were still difficult moments ahead. Thomas continued to struggle with standing up to Stephanie, though I began to see small signs of him reclaiming his independence. He changed his phone password, started reconnecting with old friends, and even went to a counselor to discuss the dynamics of his marriage. As for me, I continued building the rich, full life I had discovered through adversity. The painful experience of being abandoned after surgery had ultimately led to growth. I might never have found otherwise. I learned that helping others doesn't always guarantee they'll help you, but it does build karma that returns in unexpected ways. I discovered the difference between helping and enabling, and between loneliness and solitude. Most importantly, I realized that our worth isn't determined by how others treat us, but by how we respond to life's challenges. Sometimes the greatest betrayals lead to the most profound personal growth. To those of you watching who may be facing disappointment from family members or feeling alone, please know that there is a community waiting to embrace you. Your value doesn't diminish because someone failed to see it. Sometimes the family we create through friendship proves more reliable than the one we're born into. Have you ever experienced a situation where family let you down but strangers stepped up? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear this message of hope and resilience. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes when one door closes, it's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a different and sometimes better chapter.